In this video, we're going to talk about some of the solutions to reduce or even eliminate most of the emissions from cement and steel production. This information will complement the videos that I've included below on carbon cure concrete and green hydrogen that can be used for steel production. So as we've pointed out, both steel and cement production are very energy intensive. So one of the things that we might try to do is increase its efficiency. This is something that can be done with cement kilns. The cement kilns are basically where we bake the limestone to separate it into carbon dioxide and the quicklime, which we'll use for cement. Kilns have become a lot more efficient since the 1970s. So if we replace old machinery with more modern types, it's going to use a lot less energy. And because these forms of energy are very expensive, we need a lot to produce cement, we're basically going to be able to pay for itself by doing these replacements. So many cement works have actually replaced their kilns with newer machinery, and as a result are using less energy and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in cement production. But merely making things more efficient isn't necessarily going to be good enough in the future. And one promising option is going to be potentially to use renewable energy for the heating used in steel and cement production. One of the most promising forms of green energy is green hydrogen, and as I mentioned, this is discussed in a video as applied to steel below. But another option is to use a renewable energy called concentrating solar. Concentrating solar is currently used in a lot of desert areas like California and in Spain, and it's an effective way to generate electricity. More recently, we also have newer styles that can potentially generate enough heat to make temperatures hot enough for steel and cement production. So this on the left is a traditional concentrating solar plant. Basically, there's a giant central tower and it's surrounded by mirrors. And what the mirrors do is they direct sunlight to that central tower and they make it extraordinarily hot. That heat creates steam with the water that's in the tower, and that steam is used to turn a turbine. In other words, we're using a turbine like we do in a lot of other electricity generation plants. And basically, the solar power that's being directed by the mirrors provides green, emissions-free solar energy. Now, one of the problems with this traditional style is that it didn't get hot enough for cement or steel production. It's hot enough to create steam for electricity production, but we need even hotter temperatures if we're going to generate enough heat to create cement and steel. This is where the Heliogen system, which has had a lot of recent investment, becomes important. So you'll notice that like the traditional style, it's got a lot of mirrors and there's a central tower that's being used to direct the heat. One of the things the Heliogen system does, however, is it uses computing power and artificial intelligence to constantly adjust these mirrors so that they're getting the maximum amount of sun directed at the central tower. Traditional style don't use computing power in this way. So what these adjustments do is they're constantly making sure that the tower is getting the maximum amount of sun and that the temperatures can get even higher. So currently, Heliogen is capable of generating enough heat that it can actually be used for steel and cement production. And the Heliogen system is hoping that it can be used for the industrial heat for steel relatively soon. This is a slightly older technology than some of the green hydrogen techniques that have been used in Sweden, but this is also potentially a promising way to generate steel. And this would be very useful in very sunny areas, like I mentioned, places like California and Spain. And those are two parts of the world where this style of energy generation is already being used. So people have experience with it, and again, it could be made even better to generate enough heat to produce basically energy that's clean and green for cement and steel production. Another thing that can also be done is to try to reduce the amount of cement that will be used in concrete products that we want to make. So cement is the fine powder that we mix with gravel or some other kind of aggregate and water to generate concrete. So what we can do is replace some of that cement with other items that aren't necessarily as energy intensive, or to recycle things from other sources of industrial products. Two current methods actually come from burning coal and steel production. So fly ash is basically what's left behind when we burn coal to generate electricity or some other industrial process. Slag is basically what's left behind when we produce iron. So you may remember from the previous video that when we get iron ore, we basically heat it up, and one of the byproducts that's left behind is some of this slag. So we can use either the fly ash or the slag to replace some of the cement in concrete. And again, because cement is so energy productive, using or recycling materials in this way is going to lower the energy consumption by a lot. The other nice thing about this is that it also can potentially make the cement and the concrete even better. So when we make concrete out of fly ash or slag products, then it can actually make the concrete stronger and more durable, and it can also make it less permeable. So what that means is it actually resists absorbing water. One of the things that can damage concrete is if it soaks up a lot of water and it freezes, frozen water expands, so it can actually cause cracks in the concrete. If we reduce the amount of water that can get in, however, then it's going to become a lot more resistant to that kind of damage caused by cold temperatures. So not only does this recycle waste products from other processes, but it can actually make cement and concrete even better than it already is. However, there are some downsides to relying on slag and fly ash to try to reduce the amount of cement that we're going to be using. The first problem concerns the slag, which comes from iron production. There simply isn't enough to help us with increased concrete production because we're already using pretty much all of it. So because this product is so valuable already, there basically isn't any lying around anymore. So we're already using it, we're already recycling it to the maximum degree. Fly ash has even more problems, and some of them are as follows. First of all, we don't necessarily always have some available. Because it's dependent on places where we're burning coal, if we're not burning coal for any other purpose, then we're not going to have any available. So remember that a lot of cement is actually coming from local areas, and if we're not using coal to generate electricity, then we're not going to have any fly ash available. This is actually the case for a province like Ontario, where we haven't burned coal for electricity production in a decade now. So again, we don't have any lying around to use in this process. Other parts of the world might, but we don't here in Ontario, and increasingly, as more places give up coal, this means that they're not going to have it available either. A second problem is that it can actually increase the demand for coal. Now, one of the things that we need to do as quickly as possible to solve global warming is to stop burning coal because it's the dirtiest form of fossil fuel. Fortunately, we are doing this, and because coal is no longer an especially cheap option for generating electricity, more and more places around the world are giving up coal production for electricity. The problem is that if we actually use fly ash for concrete, then it actually increases demand for coal and it actually improves the price. Suddenly, coal, which is very expensive, if we can sell this product, becomes more affordable, and it gives us an incentive to keep on using it. So again, anything that's going to keep coal-fired plants running for longer is not a good option, and unfortunately, using fly ash for this purpose seems to be helping keep a lot of coal plants running for longer than perhaps they should. A final problem is that we don't necessarily know if fly ash is going to be safe when it's used in concrete. We do know that when fly ash is stored, it's basically an industrial waste product, and basically the stuff that doesn't get burned in coal is really nasty. There's a lot of heavy metals, things that cause cancer, and the like. When we put it into concrete, we're pretty sure that the fly ash and all of its toxic materials are locked in it, but we don't actually have any good studies to suggest that this is actually the case. So again, we're pretty sure that it's locked away, but We're not entirely sure. And again, using something like this that's toxic is not necessarily going to be very attractive to many people. So for that reason, fly ash, while we can use it in concrete, maybe isn't the best option. Slag, while it is a great idea, is already being used to this maximum degree, so we don't have more to continue improving cement production in this way. But we do have another material that is safer and more widely available, and we can use it for cement production, and it's glass. One of the interesting problems with glass is that we put it in our blue boxes in places like Ontario, and we basically think that it's going to get recycled. But glass recycling is extraordinarily expensive, and there isn't much demand for it. So most of the time when you put your glass jars in the blue box, they're not actually getting recycled. Instead, they're just getting hauled to the dump and they're getting thrown out. Now, glass is not dangerous, it's inert, but it is a waste of material. So when we're throwing it out, we're basically losing some of the materials that we could use for recycling or potentially for cement production. So what we can do is we can essentially grind up the glass very fine, basically to make it like the sand or the cement that would be used in concrete production. And we can use it to replace part of it. So glass, again, we already have it. It's something that we're recycling. We're reducing the amount of cement that we need to create from limestone, and that's going to save us a lot of energy. So what this can do is it can reduce the emissions of concrete by about 20 to 40%, and it only increases the price by about 2 to 5%. So that means that we solve one problem for a relatively reasonable price. Unfortunately, that 2 to 5% premium may be enough to discourage some people from using it. But again, given that it reduces the energy use a lot, and because we have a lot of glass lying around that's not getting recycled, I think that this would be a worthwhile trade-off, and programs that could encourage us to use more glass would be potentially helpful for solving multiple problems at once. One of the things that we can also do with steel to reduce its energy production is that we can recycle it. The good news is that because steel is so valuable, we do recycle as much of it as we can. So this is why in a city like London, there's lots of places where you can drop off your old cars or other forms of steel and actually get paid money for scrap because it's so valuable. Steel can be recycled many, many times. So this is one of the reasons why it's important for us to try to make sure it gets to those plants. Another really important reason is that it uses a lot less energy. So pulling the iron ore out of the ground takes a lot of energy. Processing steel from that iron ore takes a lot of energy as well. But when we recycle it, we're using almost 3/4 or almost 75% less energy. So again, because steel is such an energy intensive process, if we can recycle it instead, then it means we're going to use a lot less electricity or a lot less power, and that's going to mean a lot fewer greenhouse gas emissions. One of the other nice things is that many steel recycling plants actually do use electricity to melt down the steel and reprocess it. So this is actually something that's easier to green than the original steel making process as well. So again, it's more likely that we can use things like wind power or solar power to power our steel recycling plants. So one of the good pieces of news about this video and the content that's covered in the videos below is that we actually do know a lot of solutions to make cement and steel production a lot greener than it currently is. So we've had a lot of tools to make it a lot lower emissions, and increasingly we have tools to probably get rid of nearly all of the emissions. The problem is that we need to make these investments in these technologies as soon as possible. In fact, as we see global warming getting worse, it would have been nice if we could have made these investments 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. But we can make those investments today. But we do need to make sure that we're doing things like making sure that there's government support for the research. Maybe there's subsidies to try to encourage people to install these new technologies and the like. This is where we actually need social programs to try to make these kinds of investments more worthwhile. The good news is that we've learned from previous weeks that as we adopt new technologies, there's a very good chance that the learning curve will kick in. And the more of these that we install, or the more of these technologies that we use, the cheaper that will get over time. And that encourages us to adopt them even more. So thank you for listening to this week's video lecture. As always, if you have any questions about what I covered in this video or the previous one about problems with steel and cement, please don't hesitate to email me. Until next time, when I'll see you then.